You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
Talking Drums is an Africa-focused travel platform and marketplace that aims to bring people together and connect them to Africa. Overall, the aim is to leave nothing but footprints, so having that environmental focus, thinking about positive environmental impacts. First and foremost, it is a beautiful continent. There is so much to see and so much to do, and it's incredibly diverse. Content creators, these travel platforms, it's enhancing our own narratives, it's showcasing Africa through our eyes, and it's really, really showcasing the Africa that we know.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest, Yaa Ofori-Ansah, who is the founder of Talking Drums, which is a platform that provides travel tips, reviews, travel adventures, and cultural experiences from Africa. Welcome to the podcast, Yaa. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, Tessa. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on the podcast today. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Yaa Ofori-Ansah.
Thank you so much. I've definitely listened to the podcast before and I enjoy it so much. So I'm really excited to be on here. So a bit about Yaa. My name gives away that I'm of Ghanaian heritage. So Yaa means a girl born on Thursday.
Oh, beautiful.
Thursday born. So I think having a name like this really instilled my heritage and culture into me from a young age. And that has really guided a lot of things, including my interests. So I'm very much a Pan-African. I'm a travel enthusiast and I have a passion for traveling Africa, which culminated in me founding Talking Drums. But along the journey, it's enabled me to explore, to travel, to immerse myself in different cultures, to try and learn different languages, to read literature from across the world, but also with a focus on Africa as well. So very much African, very much Pan-African, and very much a travel enthusiast.
Fantastic. So you've given us great insights into who you are and the early introductions into, I guess, the world of travel and tourism in Africa. So as we mentioned at the beginning, you are the founder of Talking Drums. So I was hoping you can tell us a bit more about Talking Drums, how the idea came about, and what you aim to achieve through it.
So Talking Drums is an Africa-focused travel platform and marketplace that aims to bring people together and connect them to Africa. As a travel enthusiast, I used to find that when I wanted to travel Africa, others didn't have the same enthusiasm that I had. Couldn't understand why. And so that really turned me into a solo traveler. And I explored a lot of Africa solo and continue to do so. But then I had an epiphany that maybe there are others out there like me, but also meeting people along the way, traveling around the continent, engaging with people. I was having these experiences that were just so different and so unique. I was getting off the beaten track. I wasn't always sticking to the tourist trails. I was very conscious of my impact and I really wanted to support local businesses. So when I established Talking Drums, which initially was a blog by a different name, but over the years has snowballed into Talking Drums. The name itself struck me because I have two drums myself from Ghana, but also we know of Talking Drums as calling and responding.
Yes.
And I like the idea that this platform is calling people, calling them for their adventures, and people are responding by undertaking their own adventures or coming on our trips as well. So the meaning of the name and why I chose to rename it, I was at a conference actually in Ghana and someone mentioned the Talking Drums and I thought this would be a great name for something, but it felt a right fit for this platform because of the calling and responding that we get from Talking Drums. So it has 4 components. There's a blog. The blog shares my own experiences has book reviews, also has tips, and also shares perhaps events I've recently attended, so that cultural element. There's also travel adventures. So these are group travel trips that I organize to certain countries, and people can book either by themselves or they can come with friends. These are small group trips because the intention is for people to have a real immersion in the experience, but also to leave as friends by this shared experience they've had, this shared connection. There's a travel planning service. So if you don't necessarily want to join our trips, we can help you plan your own trips. And then also there's a marketplace. So the marketplace has products sourced from the places we visit, from local artisans, local entrepreneurs, and local businesses. So for example, there's an amazing Kenyan brand called Shkwela, and this was founded by a law graduate who at the time couldn't find a job in law, but Kenya had just introduced a plastic bag ban. And so she found a gap in the market whereby she was bringing the art of kiondo bags, which is a woven style of bags. She was bringing that to the market. So she works with women in coastal communities who have been weaving for decades and generations, and then she brings that to the market. So the products that we source there kind of all have a story behind them. So there's the 4 key elements of the platform, and overall, the aim is to leave nothing but footprints. So having that environmental focus, thinking about positive environmental impacts. So, be a tourist, but also get off the beaten track and explore other places, get to know local people, and also support local businesses. So thinking about the economic and social impact that you may have, how can you support local businesses? How can they benefit from your presence in their country?
Amazing. So you detailed your experience solo traveling in Africa and your need to explore and make an impact. So from your experience, what are some of the challenges of traveling in Africa that you've experienced?
That's a good question. I think Africa is a vast continent of 54 official countries. And I think that there's such diversity within the countries and also in terms of infrastructure. So yes. I think one of the challenges is movement, yes. Free movement. So if I think about traveling from country A to country B, for example, in other continents, it might be easier to move around more freely, perhaps via train, perhaps via bus, via air, and it's a lot more competitively priced. To do so in Africa, there are a few challenges. One, it may be not necessarily as easy to move around from country to country. So you might only have one mode of transport or two. So for example, it might be through road or by air. Air is going to be a lot more expensive than road. So that automatically prices out some people who might want to explore their continent. But also inter-air travel in Africa is also more expensive than in other continents. So it's difficult to fly around and you may have to stop over in certain places. You might not necessarily have direct flights, etc. Yes. So the ease of travel is different. And I'd also say in terms of pricing, so kind of just alluded to that just now, but the price points in terms of traveling around and sometimes even having to leave the continent in order to return. So to go from country A to country B, sometimes it's cheaper to leave the continent on an airline and to come back in. So essentially, it can be more difficult to move around the continent. Some regions are easier than others. So I find traveling around Southern Africa between countries is easier, and Eastern Africa is a lot more easier than West Africa, for example. And also the price points are quite different. But I think the challenge is the movement and the infrastructure. So if we think about other continents with trains, air, and by road, you have a few different options, but the price point is also more competitive than to do so across the continent. So if you wanted to travel Africa, it might be a bit more expensive and it might be a bit more difficult. But you also might find that you have to make several stops in other places before you get to your destination as well. So you might not necessarily be able to go directly from country to country.
Fantastic, thank you. So you've beautifully detailed the challenges of traveling in Africa, different regions, I guess the contrast between east, west, south, north, and from your perspective and what you've experienced. So if we go into a bit more detail, or I guess specifically talk about tourism in Africa, can you give us reasons why you believe it is important to develop tourism in Africa?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, it is a beautiful continent. There is so much to see and so much to do, and it's incredibly diverse. So if you have an interest in nature, we know Africa has various national parks, safari parks, conservation areas. If you like hiking, you have Africa's tallest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, the most incredible beaches, but also the opportunity to dive amongst coral and the most beautiful marine life. If you like cultural immersion, there's a vast number of tribes and cultures and languages. And so there's so much to do and there's so much to see. There really is something for everyone. So I think that's one of the things that always encourages me to return, because you're always going to be learning something new. You're always going to be seeing something different. Even if I've gone back to the same country or the same location, no two experiences have been the same. So to put it simply, because of the beauty of Africa, the diversity and the vastness, that's why it's so important to explore it. But also, I think that's why it's so important for various countries to tap into the potential of tourism, to showcase what their countries have to offer and to encourage people to travel there.
You touched on a key point there, which is the beauty of Africa. And earlier you mentioned you're passionate about sustainable tourism, sustainable development. And you use travel and tourism to contribute to sustainable development. Can you tell us some of the ways that you've successfully done this through your Talking Drums platform, through your travel and tourism?
Absolutely. So one of the things I set out to do when I established Talking Drums was to really think about the impact I'd be having on local communities and local businesses and ensuring they actually benefited from our presence. So I had done some previous work in sustainability and ESG, specifically around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
And the goals are planning to, or the aim is to eradicate poverty by 2030. And so I looked at the goals and specifically at the indicators, because the indicators are the measurement of the goals, and thought about how I could create solutions. And so through Talking Drums, we aligned to 4 of the goals. That is quality education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, and reduced inequalities. And so by buying our products or by traveling with us, guests are actually directly contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. In addition to that, and with the focus on local businesses, as much as possible, we try and procure goods and services from local businesses and entrepreneurs. So a recent trip that I hosted, we actually worked with 7 local businesses directly and indirectly many more. And so it's just taken that step further to think about your impact and actually planning your trip accordingly to ensure that you have a positive impact and that you're supporting local businesses.
Fantastic, thank you. So you talked about aligning your objectives with the Sustainable Development Goals. So from your opinion, do you think, I know we're talking about Africa as one place, but do you think Africa has done enough to harness tourism for growth and economic development? Obviously, this is a very wide question, but answer as best as you can.
So I would say a lot has been done, but there's more that can be done. I think overall, parts of Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa have a more established tourism industry. And West Africa is now doing a lot more to promote its tourism potential.
You've raised a very interesting point, because one country that I believe has done well recently is Ghana. You know, with the Year of the Return, it's popularised Ghana as a tourist destination, both within Africa and globally. What do you think other African countries can learn from this?
This is a great question. So I think the popularity of the Year of Return really put Ghana on the map as a tourism destination and also as an investment destination.
Yes.
So estimates suggest that about 1.1 million tourists visited Ghana in 2019. And according to the Ministry of Tourism, it generated about $1.9 billion, which is 1.5 billion pounds worth of revenue. I think that one of the key things countries can learn from that is the importance of marketing your own country and what it has to offer.
Yes.
So in addition to all the amazing things you can do in Accra. What could you do outside of Accra? How could you get there? The cultural explosion that we've seen with festivals such as Afrochella, in addition to the already thriving musical and art scenes. So I think it really did a lot to promote the country as a tourism destination. And I think there's a lot to be said for countries marketing themselves and thinking about who are they trying to attract and how can they do so. And I think the Year of the Return did a lot to promote that. And also beyond the return. So following the Year of the Return, the government announced the Beyond the Return initiative to continue building on the strides they had made. And I think that's also really important as well. Once you've had this popularity, how do you maintain it? And I think there are a number of ways that can be done, but I think the key thing is marketing. And then subsequently after marketing, how are you making it easy for tourists to navigate your country? So what are you doing to invest in infrastructure? What are you doing to showcase what your country has to offer? How are you demystifying your country? So essentially inviting people to your country. It's as simple as that, I think, inviting people. And then once they're there, helping them by promoting what your offering is.
So you've detailed how Ghana has sustained tourism growth and the benefits. We know that tourism is a powerful vehicle for economic growth and job creation, and it's been demonstrated all around the world. But in Africa, there seems to be a bit of almost a scepticism about the economic growth and benefits of tourism. Why do you think that is, and is that changing?
I would say some countries may align to their traditional ways of income generation. So that might be through the exports of certain goods and services. But I think if we look at the Year of Return and what Ghana was able to achieve in the space of a year and how much it was able to generate in the space of a year, I think that definitely shows not only the tourism potential, but also highlights to other countries what can be achieved and what can be achieved in such a short amount of time. So I have heard that other countries are considering doing the same or similar in terms of their own Year of Return. But I also think there's value in countries highlighting their offerings, because if the infrastructure is in place and if people are traveling from so far, they'll decide to explore a few other countries in their vicinity. So it has a knock-on effect in surrounding countries, even if just one country decides to take up the mantle to really push tourism as an income generator.
Fantastic. So if we look at countries that you're familiar with, such as Ghana and Tanzania, that you spent a lot of time traveling, from your perspective, is the travel and tourism industry in those markets internationally competitive?
That's a great question. I think it varies. If we look at Tanzania, for example, they have done a lot to promote tourism. It's one of their biggest income generators, but also it's famous for certain sites and certain industries. So, for example, if people want safaris, they know to go to East Africa. It's known for that. However, recently, the president of Tanzania said in an interview that she'd visited America and she was surprised to learn that people thought the Serengeti, one of the most famous national parks in the world, people thought that was in Kenya. And she was surprised to find that people thought Mount Kilimanjaro was somewhere else. And these are some of the natural wonders of Africa and even the world. And so in order to rectify that, she undertook a tour of Tanzania called the Royal Tour. And she showcased the country and its offerings, and they released it as a documentary to really highlight what Tanzania had to offer as a tourism destination. But specifically, it was promoting to tourists outside of Africa. So I think that served to provide clarity over what the country had to offer specifically and to encourage people to visit Tanzania. Tanzania also has established tourism authority, and they also do a lot of work around promoting Tanzania, its national parks, its natural wonders, but also hosting various exhibitions to encourage businesses and tour operators to come together to promote Tanzania as a country. I think there's a lot that countries in West Africa could learn from how tourism is done in East Africa. And I think there's an opportunity for knowledge sharing, peer-to-peer learning. So if I take Ghana, for example, excellent work is being done in the tourism industry to promote it. But I also think that there's also opportunities to support new businesses that are now taking advantage of the new opportunities that tourism presents, such as tour operators, restaurants, hotel operators, and so forth. But I think in order to really be competitive in that space, there are some small things that really, really help countries kind of stand out. And it's things such as hospitality and customer service. How can we hone into these areas to really have a competitive offering? So I truly believe there's a lot of value in knowledge sharing and also in peer-to-peer learning, and how countries in West Africa who are maybe new to the tourism industry, how can they learn from the more established areas and markets along East and Southern Africa? So I think it could be in ways such as attending some of the tourism-specific colleges and universities or the courses that are provided, because I don't think it's necessarily having to recreate the wheel. I think that there's a lot that could be learned already, and it's just about tapping into the knowledge and expertise that countries who have established tourism industries have already paved the way for and have already highlighted. So I think that Ghana, for example, should really tap into the knowledge and expertise of the Eastern and Southern African countries who have been in the tourism industry for a longer period of time.
You've discussed the importance of marketing and promoting the tourism industry in Africa, and also the importance of knowledge sharing. Earlier on, you mentioned the challenges with regards to the lack of transport interconnectivity. If we speak about that specifically, what impact does Africa's lack of transport interconnectivity, obviously I'm being very general here, but what impact does the lack of transport interconnectivity have on the travel and tourism industry?
So I think overall, if it's difficult to navigate a country, it will come with its own frustrations. And that in turn may have a knock-on effect in terms of return or repeat visitors. And word of mouth is one of the strongest ways of having or enhancing your business or your sector or industry. So I think there needs to be a focus on ease of transport, ease of navigating, but also the cost as well. Once those things are addressed, that will in turn have a knock-on effect in terms of encouraging people to visit, knowing that when they get to a country, it's going to be easy for them to navigate. And also in turn, that then will benefit the country as a whole, so that there won't necessarily be such a focus on particular areas. You can hopefully decentralize tourism, and especially if you're looking to focus on domestic tourism.
Fantastic. We've discussed the challenges that the lack of interconnectivity creates, but a lot of times when we're talking about tourism in Africa or looking at data, a lot of that data looks at travel from outside of Africa into Africa, but a lot is unsaid with regards to tourism and destinations in Africa for Africans. Why do you think that is?
So again, I think this varies. I think one thing I always look at as a positive when I visit countries is when they have tourism sites and they have a price for local people and a price for foreign visitors. Some people might get frustrated with that, but actually, to me, that talks to accessibility. Going back to my earlier point about local citizens being ambassadors for their countries, this is a way to promote that. And by making things accessible to local people, that in turn can encourage tourism as a whole. But I think that one of the key issues around intra-Africa travel is actually visas. And this is something that comes up from time to time, the difficulty of traveling across the continent from a visa perspective. Perhaps an individual is unable to get a visa, or they may have particular issues gaining access to countries. So I know over the years there have been talks around making the continent as a whole visa-free to African citizens, or having a continental passport. And I think these conversations are ongoing, but there's definitely value in making traveling around Africa easier. It can actually be more difficult to travel across Africa on an African passport than it can be on a non-African passport, which in my mind doesn't make any sense. However, I think there are strides regionally. So with ECOWAS, for example, if you have an ECOWAS passport, for the most part, you can travel around West Africa freely and stay in a country for up to 90 days. Similarly with East Africa and South Africa. So I think regionally, there's a lot of work being done to make things easier. But I think we need to see that on a continental wide level as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So you've discussed about making things accessible to local people and also the difficulties of Africans getting visas to travel to other African countries. So for those who are eager or keen to travel to different African countries, from your experience and what you've seen so far, which countries or hidden gems in Africa should people look out for when considering traveling around the continent?
So I think this is a great question. I've personally been to 11 countries in Africa, and I don't actually usually count, but I get asked this question so many times. I really just have to do a tally. I've also repeated a few countries a number of times. So I do feel like each time my experience has been very different. Whilst I can't talk to all 54 countries at the moment, I would say if I think about Ghana, one of my favorite places that I visited was a village called Bonue in the Ashanti region, which according to legend is the home of kente cloth.
Oh, wow.
That is where Akan kente cloth originates from. And I think one of the reasons that I really enjoyed learning about the history and seeing hand-woven kente cloth is that it's an internationally recognized cloth, and it's something that is associated with Ghana as well as parts of Côte d'Ivoire. And so to actually be in the place where it's said to have originated from and to learn about the history and to see the effort and artwork that goes into creating each piece, I think that was a really incredible experience. And similarly, if I go across the continent to East Africa, and I know people have heard me say this many times, but the Ngorongoro crater is truly one of my favorite places on Earth. It's an incredible place that used to be a volcano taller than Mount Kilimanjaro. But according to history, there was a volcanic eruption that caused it to collapse in itself. And now it is a caldera filled with animals. And I'd always heard about the Serengeti, but the Ngorongoro crater is actually on your way to the Serengeti, and it's just the most incredible place. And so those are my two key hidden gems at the moment, but there are so many more. And I think part of my reason and love for travel is being able to explore these hidden gems. And that's why I really do encourage going off the beaten track and learning about these places that perhaps you wouldn't have if you stayed on the track.
Thank you for sharing that. So we know that Talking Drums is a digital platform, and obviously with the rapid adoption of tech across Africa, we are seeing more digitally savvy consumers, and they're driving the adoption of new ways of travel and tourism. We're seeing more experiential packages in the travel and tourism industry and in Africa. How is this changing the industry and what you do?
I think the rise of tech has also seen the rise of travel platforms that are encouraging people to travel to countries in Africa that perhaps in the past wouldn't have been your usual tourist destination. I think tech has really done a lot to showcase these countries, but also enabled people to explore and navigate a lot better. So if I think about Uber, for example, I almost wonder when I think about having to, get a taxi before ride sharing, that was an experience in itself. So I think tech is making things easier, and tech also presents a lot of opportunities. But I think at the heart of it, tech has definitely made things a lot easier, and also provides opportunities for people to come together and to travel together and to explore together. It could be as simple as using social media, Instagram, for example, is a great platform for discovery,
Yes.
for learning about destinations, finding places within countries, but also for joining group trips such as Talking Drums. I also think in terms of booking accommodation, for example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it would be an email to a company. Now you have the ease of booking things online. So I think tech has definitely served to make things easier, and I think it will continue to do that.
You touched on a key point there, which was the rise of travel platforms and how tech is driving this. Also, in keeping with, I guess, the rise of travel platforms, we are also seeing the rise of young African travel bloggers and content creators such as yourself.
Thank you.
It's true. So, what impact is this having on the African travel and tourism industry in terms of young Africans creating authentic and genuine content that describes or portrays Africa through their lens?
Absolutely. I think that is it. It is portraying Africa through our own lenses, which is in turn demystifying what Africa has to offer. And so you find that, when you share pictures or when you share experiences, people will respond, wow, I didn't know that was there, or I didn't know this is what this country looked like. And so I think content creators, these travel platforms, it's changing the narrative, and actually it's enhancing our own narratives. It's showcasing Africa through our eyes, and it's really, really showcasing the Africa that we know. And so I'm so inspired by all the content creators that do so. And for me in particular, when I set out, I actually really struggled to share my experiences because I enjoyed them so much, but they were so personal to me. And it came to a point where I realized I actually had to share these experiences in order for people to really just understand my experiences. I could tell them about it, but once I showed them, the impact was a lot stronger than just telling them about it. So I found, for example, I recently hosted two amazing creative entrepreneurs called Rome and Cam. They're from a comedy collective called Dormtainment. And I hosted them to Tanzania, and this was somewhere they both wanted to travel for years, but we partnered on a Talking Drums travel adventure, and they were just blown away by the experience. Also, in turn, sharing their experiences with their incredible viewers and subscribers. A lot of the responses are, I'm booking my ticket, I'm going.
Brilliant.
I'm coming with you guys next time. So it really, really serves to demystify. And I think to make the experiences more accessible. I think a lot of the times people think, perhaps I can't do that. Maybe it's too expensive. Maybe it's too far. Or I don't know really what I do. But by showcasing it, actually, people realize it's accessible. It is something they can do.
Thank you for that. So we've discussed trends in digital platform, tech, and African content creators. In keeping with current trends, what trends in Africa's travel and tourism industry are you currently excited about?
So I'm actually very excited about the promotion of African culture. So at the moment, Afrobeats and Amapiano are probably two of the biggest genres internationally. And this is also serving to encourage people to visit the continent. So I think showcasing of Africa's culture is definitely on the rise. And I think being able to tap into that and feed into the cultural immersion that, for example, Talking Drums wants to provide really, really excites me. I think there's a lot of great work being done around showcasing the diverse culture of the continent or the diverse culture of even a particular country. So if I take Afrochella, for example, one of the things I really enjoyed when I attend the Afrochella Festival in Ghana is the showcasing of the different cultures of different tribes. So whilst it's a music festival, it's also a cultural festival. So the culture and the focus on culture really excites me at the moment.
I agree 100%. I guess to add to that, I think as Africans, we sometimes underestimate the power of our culture in terms of how culture can open up many other opportunities. As you said, it can lead to people travel and then people want to do business or invest in that country, and it creates a long-term relationship. So yeah, I think culture is extremely important, and it's great to see that we're seeing a rise of African culture globally.
Absolutely agree. And I think even if you drill it down to language, you have people around the world singing songs in Swahili or Yoruba or Igbo.
Yes.
I mean, this is...
And speaking in pidgin English as well.
And speaking in pidgin English, exactly.
So I guess if we kind of look at that in terms of, current trends, are you excited about African culture? If we look forward into the future, where do you see travel and tourism? I know we don't like to speak in general terms, but where do you see travel and tourism in Africa in 5 years' time, or even in somewhere specific like Ghana or Tanzania? Where do you see that in 5 years' time?
So I think it's going to continue to be a gateway for investment and for development. So I think if I even look at Ghana now, there's a lot of investment being made in infrastructure, in tourism sites. And Zanzibar recently announced that they were going to be creating a tech hub, for example. And Zanzibar is known as, a beautiful travel destination. So I really think travel and tourism is a gateway to investment.
Yes.
And also a gateway to relocation. So I predict this will continue over the next few years, but I think that we can see more of these hubs emerging as a result, be it through tech, be it through culture, be it through art. I think there'd be a lot more investment in those particular areas.
100%. And I hope to see that too. And I think, as we said before, we need to start prioritizing areas such as tourism, arts and culture, because working in international trade, I think it is a gateway into other more hard sales such as investment and trade. People need to be accustomed with your culture and have some understanding or common ground and familiarity, and then it generates investment and trade.
Absolutely agree.
So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? What will Yaa be doing?
So in 5 years' time, I really hope that Talking Drums will continue to be a platform that helps people travel and explore the continent. At the moment, we are focused on traveling to Ghana and Tanzania, and next year we are planning to expand to other destinations, including Senegal and Kenya and South Africa. So in 5 years' time, who knows? I hope we would have travelled all 54 countries of the continent and continue to help other people in their journey, but also continue to support local businesses and entrepreneurs. So for now, we've worked closely with 7 local businesses and entrepreneurs. I predict and hope that number will absolutely explode into the thousands or hundreds of thousands, but remaining focused on our initial aim and mission, which is to get off the beaten track, leave nothing but footprints, having that positive environmental impact, but also working with and partnering with and supporting local businesses in their endeavours as well. So I think more of what we're doing now, but on a wider scale.
Amazing. And hopefully I'll be able to join one of your travel expeditions in the future. So yes, I look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are good and when times are challenging. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
I do. So over the years, I've been learning Kiswahili.
Oh, wow.
Because I think it's very important to learn other African languages.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite Kiswahili proverbs is Fuata maji yaendako, and it translates to follow the water flow. I know in English there's a saying, go with the flow, but I like the specific of follow the water flow because I feel like it harkens to kind of just letting things take you where they need to take you sometimes versus you actually doing. So Fuata maji yaendako is one of my current favourite proverbs at the moment.
Beautiful. And it's the first time I've ever heard it in my life as well. So thanks for sharing that. Thank you for sharing it. So as we're coming to the end of the conversation, I was hoping you could give us some closing remarks or final calls to action for people who are interested in finding out a bit more about Talking Drums, or people who are just interested in travel and tourism in Africa in general.
Absolutely. I would say number one, travel Africa. There's a simple call to action, but travel Africa. There's so much to see. There's so much to do. And if you want to find out more about Talking Drums, you can visit www.talkingdrumstravel.com. We have so much information on there if you want to join our travel adventures, but also if you want to plan your own. We also are present on YouTube and on Instagram as well. If you search Talking Drums Travel on both. But I think the key thing is to travel Africa.
Amazing. And what a perfect way or perfect note to end today's conversation. So thank you, Yaa. It's been a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us regarding travel and tourism in Africa. I'll be looking forward to joining one of your travel expeditions, and thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you so much, Tessa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.